Hi and welcome back. Today I'm going to continue working on this push rod. I'm going to try repairing it first. I have an idea that I think is going to work and look alright, and if it doesn't, I'm no worse off than I was before. So the problem is I need to add material to the top of this push rod, but I need to make it look like it belongs there. So I'm going to try adding a piece of metal to the top of this push rod that has a decorative edge. It'll basically look like a piece of crown molding around a cabinet. And the brazing joint between the two pieces is going to be at an intersection where you would expect to see one. The main reason I want to try this is because I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to chisel out that detail after the two pieces are stuck together. I know I'm not going to be able to file the detail out, so I'm going to need to be able to rough it out with a chisel, and I need to be able to braze the pieces together first so that if they shift or move, I'm not stuck with a finished piece that's crooked. So to address some of the comments that were made after the last video, it is true that if this was an order for somebody and I had to get the work done, I wouldn't play around with this. I would just remake the piece. That would be the proper way to do it. But this isn't an order. I may be selling it later on, but I don't know. So I'm going to play around with this idea because I have the time, and if it works, I think it'll be interesting. And it might be a technique that I could use on other projects. So the best time to experiment with something like that is when you have something that's basically garbage and you've got nothing to lose anyway. I'm prepping this piece by leveling off the top of the push rod as much as I can. I'm hoping that the brazed joint doesn't show, but if it does, I want that line to be paper thin and perfectly straight. The next thing that I need to do is rough out the piece that I'm going to be adding to the push rod, and I'm going to be using a thin section of 1/8 inch flat bar. I'm going to be cutting it to the shape that I need, but I'm going to be leaving it oversized because there's a good chance that this might shift a little bit in the fire when I'm brazing it, so I need room to correct that if I have to. This piece is actually the second one that I cut. I was a little worried that I didn't leave myself enough room if this thing did shift in the fire, so I cut another piece that was a little bit larger. Now all I need to do is wire the pieces together and put them in the fire and get them ready for brazing. You can see how the front edge of this piece is going to wrap around that pin that I added to the push rod, so I'm hoping that that visual interest will make it look like a design feature and not just a repair. Wiring pieces together is always kind of awkward. You got to get all the wires set up and then you tighten them up gradually, move the thing around, see if it's going to loosen up, and then keep tightening the wires as you go. Another solution would have been to drill a couple of really fine holes and use something like a small finishing nail or something like that as a rivet, and just put 2 rivets in there, enough to hold the thing together, and then put it in the fire. But I didn't have any drill bits small enough to make a couple of holes that wouldn't be noticeable later. The brazing process is exactly the same as I did for the last video. You get your fire ready, make sure it's good and solid so you don't have to touch it while you're brazing, and you lay out an area that you're going to be setting the work with a pair of tongs or a poker, or something other than the work. You want to get the fire ready, just lay the piece in there so nothing moves and there's no stress on those wires at all, because once they heat up they lose all their strength. So you got to put the piece in very quickly, very in a very specific spot, and leave it there. Don't touch it. Here I just have the piece sitting on top of the fire and I'm just warming the piece up basically. As soon as the flux will stick to it, I'm going to pull it out, apply the flux, and then put the piece back in the fire. And again, I'm just using standard laundry detergent 20 mule team borax as a flux. So now I have the flux on the piece and I'm setting up the fire and I'm getting ready to put the piece in the fire for the last time. So I'm digging a hole that's a little bit deeper because I need the fire to wrap around the piece a little bit more. I have those wires to contend with, so I'm moving coals around so that I can get those wires in the fire, and then I'm just gently placing it in, and I'm just going to leave it there and wait for the thing to heat up. I'm going to take a really slow heat. I want it to heat up very gradually, and most importantly, I don't want to get those wires to a white heat because then they'll lose all their strength and totally let go. So with this process, like most things in blacksmithing, it's just all about taking your time and letting the heat work its way through the piece, and don't rush it because you'll burn it up or you'll get things too hot in one area and they won't be hot enough in another area. So the best thing to do is just take your time and go at it very slowly. So I'm getting close to temperature. It's been a couple of minutes since I started this, and what I'm looking at is the area right in front of where the brazing rod is right now. You'll see that spot get molten. That's a little bit of braze that's left over from the last time when I brazed the pin to the push rod. When I see that getting molten, I know I'm getting close to temperature because that's sitting a little bit further down in the fire. So I'm just going to ease off on the blower, let the heat even out, and I'll just set the brazing rod on the work, and you can see it starting to flow right now. The back end of the push rod isn't quite as hot and the rod isn't melting yet, so I just have to wait another second or two until the heat builds itself up into that area. So I'll keep working on the other areas and I'll get back to that. So the brazing is done, and I'm going to leave it in the fire. I've shut the air blast off and I'm just letting it cool naturally. I'm waiting for the brazing rod to freeze, and then I'll pull it out. If I tried to remove it right now, I might shift something and then it would freeze outside of the fire, and I'd have to basically start the process over again. So here's the piece right out of the fire. It didn't twist, but it did slide over a little bit. You can see how the pin is not quite centered in that raised area that I left, but there's still enough material. I just need to cut off the one side to even it out. I think it's going to look good when it's done, and adding that extra piece definitely repaired the problem. There's no way this is going to flex in the lock. Here I'm using a flap wheel to grind off as much of the flux as possible and get back down to bare metal. The flux leaves kind of a glassy, gritty residue, and it's really hard on files, so I try to grind away as much as I can. In the areas where I can't reach with the grinder, I'll move to a coarse half-round rasp. The teeth on these are very, very aggressive and they don't clog up very easily, so they remove a lot of material quickly, and they're also a lot cheaper than files, so when you do wear them out, they don't hurt as much. So everything up until now has been pretty straightforward, and this is the area where I start experimenting. As you know, I use chisels a lot, but I've never really used them to clean up a piece like this, and certainly nothing as complicated as this. And I've never used them to create a surface that is basically ready to file. That is just to use the file to put a finished texture on the piece. I know that I'm going to be able to get a file in here to just smooth off the surface, but using a file in this confined space is going to be too awkward to remove the amount of material that I want to remove from this piece. So I'm going to be using cold chisels to shape the piece as well as get the surface 99% of the way there, and then at that point I can either use a file on the surfaces where I can reach with a file, or I can go straight to sandpaper to finish off the areas that I can't get to with a file. I don't want to get too carried away with the detailing on this because it's going to make it look out of place, so I'm just going to be cutting a pretty simple bevel on the underside of the cap piece that I've added on. So here I'm further along and I have everything roughed out the way that I want, and I'm ready to start on the finishing cuts. For that I'm going to be using a wide chisel. This one happens to be a fairly heavy one, but it doesn't need to be. Using a wide chisel is going to allow me to take a shearing cut across the face that I'm trying to level. I'm going to start at one end and I'm going to take very light overlapping cuts and work my way to the other side. So the bevel is going to ride on the surface that I finished, and the cutting edge is going to take off anything that's rising above that surface, and it's going to leave me with a pretty flat, smooth surface when I'm done. And when the chisel work is done, the final step is to basically just scrub the surface with either a file or some sandpaper to even out the texture. Hi, I'm Dennis, and thanks for watching. If you have questions and you want to contact me directly, you can do so by emailing me at either one of the addresses that I have listed here. It may take me a couple of days, but I will get back to you. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.